Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Armenia has decided to pull back from the Moscow-led Collective Security Treaty Organization after years of close ties with Russia, including its reliance on Russian-backed peacekeepers. Armenia is now distancing itself from the very alliance that once guaranteed its security. Now, with tensions rising after the second Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, Armenia's pivot towards a new partnership raises critical questions. Which does this say about Armenia's shifting priorities? Will Russia stand by as Armenia seeks alternatives? And what does this all mean for the balance of power in the South Caucasus and beyond? Let's dive into all of these questions. Let me welcome my guest, Raffi Elliott, political risk analyst, Armenian Mirror Spectator. Good to have you on the program. Let's just start right away. What prompted this from Armenia pulling out of this? Give us a little bit of take. And what does it mean for Armenia's security priorities in the near term?
Well, first of all, it's a long time coming, though I should clarify that Armenia hasn't actually exited the CSTO. What the most recent development is that Armenia has refused to ratify the CSTO's latest 2024 budget and also therefore has not paid its membership dues. Now, what that means, technically speaking, is that Armenia has until the end of 2026 to do so before the CSTO leadership is in any position to make any kind of judgment on it. Though the Russian Foreign Ministry has implied that it will do nothing to close the door on Armenia's membership, meaning that they're still trying to be conciliatory towards Armenia. However, from Armenia's perspective, the CSTO, which for your viewers was founded in 1991, 1992, as a sort of continuation of the now dissolved Warsaw Pact, like a Russian-led counterpart to NATO. And Armenia's membership in it was essentially meant as part of the country's security architecture to help guarantee Armenia's defense from outside threats, in particular Turkey, which happens to be NATO's second largest military and is considered to be the largest existential threat to Armenia, given that it is the perpetrator of the 1915 Armenian genocide, a crime which it still hasn't recognized or seen as being wrong. So it's understandable that for Armenia's point of view, even its modern foreign policy is built around the idea that it may or may not happen again. So CSTO membership was seen as a guarantee of protection of Armenia's borders. The other benefit that Armenia gained from CSTO membership was access to cheaper weapon systems out of Russian manufacturers than they would otherwise get on the open market. However, both of these advantages seem to have negated themselves in the last 5 years. So as you brought up, the 2020 second Nagorno-Karabakh war saw virtually no involvement by the CSTO. However, that was to be expected because the CSTO clearly defines itself as protecting the sovereignty of its member states, and Nagorno-Karabakh was never seen as within the purview of the CSTO. But in the meantime, Azerbaijan has also attacked inside of the borders of sovereign Armenia, and in some places up into 5 kilometers inside Armenia's border, which it currently still occupies. And the CSTO has failed to condemn or even act against that aggression. So it's a clear violation of its own charter. Incidentally, Armenia did pull up the Article 4, which is the CSTO's version of NATO's Article 5. And the CSTO took about 2 weeks to send an investigative committee to Armenia, which could not conclude whether or not Armenia's sovereignty had been violated. So this kind of made it seem very clear to Armenia that the CSTO does not actually act on its promises. Mm-hmm. And the second aspect, which I brought up earlier, being the weapons. Since Russia's involvement in the war in Ukraine, rather more clearly its invasion of Ukraine, Russia has been in no position to manufacture that much weaponry for export at all, let alone at discounted prices. So Armenia essentially cannot expect the CSTO to provide it with military systems, nor can it expect it to provide defense. Therefore, the two main interests that Armenia would have in the CSTO are negated at this time.
Okay, so thanks for all that, breaking it down. I mean, a lot of issues here. You said it's a budget issue, but ultimately it seems it is a political decision. So with that, I'm curious, just very briefly tell us, because it seems, as you laid out, that the whole purpose and the idea of this security arrangement was a failure, in essence, because you said that, you know, at a point in time with the second Nagorno-Karabakh war, this whole security apparatus didn't work. There was disappointment. How much disappointment in Russia from the Armenian side contributed to them now not paying this, potentially moving away, for all intents and purposes, from this alliance? And what does that do for, I believe, still the Russian presence at a military base in Armenia now?
Yeah, so I would like to clarify 2 points very quickly. First of all, as I mentioned, Armenia did not expect CSTO intervention during the Karabakh War itself. It did expect condemnation and action after Azerbaijan attacked into the territory of Armenia, both in 2022 and then in 2023. With that said, the disappointment, of course, in Armenia towards Russia domestically is uncalculable. For the first time in decades, you see opinion polls showing Russia as being one of the primary threats to Armenian sovereignty, when before it was always seen as some sort of an ally. But the presence of Russian bases, I mean, it's really one base with some auxiliary facilities. That's actually part of a separate bilateral treaty that Armenia has with Russia. And that base is expected to be in place until the year 2040, which is when the deal extension was made. But generally speaking, if the emotions are high in Armenia, the disillusionment in the Armenian decision-making community has pushed Armenia to look for alternatives for its defense, essentially democratizing its defense strategy, as the expression goes, meaning that in the last 2 to 3 years, Armenia has
on that note, if I may, because you
Sure.
mentioned alternative security arrangement, alternative partners maybe. Looking at recent events as well, you've had the German President, Mr. Steinmeier, who was in Yerevan, in the Armenian capital. Also very much looking at what this means. Is Armenia now pivoting more towards the West? How realistically is that? And also, how much has the role of the Prime Minister been critical in this? Give us a little take on the German President's visit and what that means for Armenia's future.
Yeah, the German president's visit to Armenia over the weekend is quite unprecedented, and it follows a string of visits by high-ranking officials from both EU member states and the EU itself, as well as the former head of NATO, who visited Armenia a few days ago. What's important here, though, is that there is broad consensus within the EU that Armenia is taking the right steps, both in terms of its realignment towards the European Union and its commitment to peace in the South Caucasus. As you may be aware, there was recently an announcement, first by Azerbaijan, incidentally, and then confirmed by the Armenian Foreign Ministry, that the wording of the peace agreement has been finalized. And then Azerbaijan very quickly switched to making threatening accusations towards Armenia, both accusing Armenia of ceasefire violations, with which the EU peacekeepers who are currently patrolling the Azerbaijani-Armenian border denied. And also Azerbaijan made demands that Armenia needed to literally change its constitution as a prerequisite for signing this peace deal. This in turn prompted the German president to openly call for Azerbaijan to sign the peace deal without delay, which is one of the first times you see an EU official putting Azerbaijan on the spotlight in that way and making clear expectations of Azerbaijan towards taking steps for peace. Mm-hmm. And broadly speaking, yes, this also coincides with last week's passing in the Armenian parliament of a bill which pledges Armenia to begin EU accession negotiations without delay. So it is quite clear that Armenia, be it through the prime minister, but also a growing consensus in the Armenian political sphere, that the Russian-led alliance, be it the military one, the economic one, or the political one, is no longer beneficial for Armenia's survival, and it is time to look for alternatives.
On that note, Raffi, I'm curious because if we stay in the region, we've had a similar kind of story in some measure in Georgia, also a country that very much was on an EU path. We've seen what's happened there in recent months internally. So I'm curious here. You said that proposal was passed. Is there a bipartisan support in Armenia? Is the opposition also in favor of this? What does this mean internally? Are Armenians in lockstep when it comes to looking at those alternatives? You said there's consensus on the European side. Is that mirrored also internally, politically in Armenia?
That's hard to say because I think opinion polling shows increasing support for this concept amongst the Armenian voters. In terms of the parliamentary opposition, it's less clear because the parliamentary opposition currently largely comprises the former government before the 2018 Velvet Revolution. And these are the leaders, the former leaders who had allied Armenia with Russia in the first place. So they've been quite skeptical of Armenia's westward turn, if you want to call it that way. They've been very critical of the way Armenia has handled its relationship with Russia because they insist that at the end of the day, the EU can only provide words of support, whereas only Russia can provide boots on the ground. However, I think from the Armenian government's perspective, when a light bulb is burnt out, switching off the light makes no difference. In this case, Russia is either unwilling or unable to come to Armenia's aid in its defense and has shown itself willing to support Armenia's closest enemies, particularly Azerbaijan.
Okay, interesting. So, and with that, we'll conclude. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. Another interesting part of the world we're going to definitely cover more of, and thank you so much. That was Raffi Elliott there.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching. That concludes this edition of World Talks. I'm Sasha Farba. We'll keep it right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.